Hi, everybody. Dave here. Our CyberWire podcast team is taking a well-earned break for the holidays, but don't fret. We'll be back January 2nd with all new episodes of our show. In the meantime, we're running extended versions of some of our favorite interviews from 2019. Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to all of you. Stay with us. Thanks for joining us for this special edition. My guest today is Sean O'Brien. He's president of the cybersecurity firm At-Risk Technologies. Prior to that, he was a member of the U.S. intelligence community and Department of Defense, fighting in Africa on the ground and against nation-states like Russia and China in cyberspace. Our conversation focuses on his concerns for the integrity of the U.S. election system and even democracy itself, as nation-state adversaries look to disenfranchise voters in the coming year's elections. But first, a message from our sponsors, McAfee. Ideas don't come for free. Budgets are begged for, long hours are required, the months, maybe even years of research, the sheer human effort of it all, the changes, the revisions, the reworks, the results. The adaptation, the innovation, the collaboration, all lead to the final moment when it pays off. And it's perfect. Your company's work. As long as it's not compromised. From device to cloud, McAfee harnesses the power of 1 billion threat sensors to design security that moves beyond intelligence to insight. So you can move beyond optimizing security products to optimizing your security posture, and not just react to threats, but remediate threats that matter. Intelligence lets you respond to your environment. Insights empower you to change it. McAfee, the device-to-cloud cybersecurity company. To learn more, go to McAfee.com/insights. That's McAfee.com/insights. And we thank McAfee for sponsoring our show.
We are where we are with a lot of things when we move things out to some of these smaller counties. I don't think anyone in the world really would have guessed that someone in a polling county in Pueblo, Colorado, would be directly assaulted from somebody from Moldova, Russia, or East Timor, for that matter. I think where we're at is people are doing the best they can with the resources and funding and knowledge that they have. And that's really kind of why we're in the position we're in today.
And when you describe the spectrum of things that we're up against, I mean, what are the various types of attacks and where are they coming from?
The wonderful thing about asymmetry in conflict is that it's asymmetric. And when you think about what's going on is if you look at the attacks, they range from something very simple, which is 10 years ago when you wanted to zip up a bunch of files, you right mouse clicked on it and you hit WinZip and the files were zipped up. And then someone says, well, why don't I build some encryption that goes on top of that so I can then encrypt the files? And then someone else comes along and goes, wow, why don't I take that technology that was meant for good and turn it to evil? So on one end, you've got a very simple attack, which is merely taking good technology and taking it into bad technology with ransomware. That's just kind of like sitting bait traps at the bottom of the ocean. Someone's going to come along and step in it. Then you have the more targeted environments where, well, I'll go ahead and build some kind of spyware so I learn a little bit about you, and then I can more effectively orchestrate my attack. And then you have the really, really good guys who are going to do non-malware-based attacks using rootkits or great tradecraft and just being network traffic-based attacks. So, and unfortunately, when it comes to elections, all of the above apply. Because when you think about it, if you really just want to create doubt in the election, just go ahead and do what I call, kind of the sore losers of the internet. When you think about a lot of people that do ransomware, you may remember when we were kids and we played baseball in the lot, or we played basketball or soccer or football. Mm-hmm. The guy who brought the ball sometimes doesn't like losing, so he takes his ball and go home, right? That's really what a ransomware guy is, right? It's really not going to be that good at maybe potentially hacking you. He bought a kit, so he's just going to take his ball and go home and ransom you. And when you think about a more advanced attack, those are going to be where I just slow the network down. But both of them get the same results, especially when you think about elections, right? If I ransom something and shut it down so it doesn't work at all, I still degrade the American people's trust in the election process. if I slow it down such that people are waiting out in line as the poll lines, and eventually someone's got to come out there and say the poll lines are so long, I'm sorry, after this person, no one else can vote. Now you're getting into a really sophisticated attack that creates even more doubt that maybe, oh, well, this county was blue, so they were doing it on purpose to avoid red from voting, or this county was red and they were keeping from blue from voting. So despite whether it's a sophisticated attack that might create greater dispersion and doubt, or a less sophisticated attack that clearly was based upon ransomware, both are going to erode trust in the fundamental principles of democracy, which is their ability to vote. So when you look at the range of attacks can happen, the end state is still the same. Let's degrade our trust in our institution of voting and democracy.
Are there historical precedents for this sort of thing, for a nation working to erode the trust of one of their adversaries?
Oh, sure. I mean, you think about it, you can go all the way back to the Peloponnesian Wars. If you ever watched the movie 300 with Leonidas, and you had the machinations happening, whether people wanted to work with Xerxes or not. You look all the way back into the interaction that we had, both the U.S. did, Africa did, and the Russians did, or the former Soviet Union, inside of Africa and South America. This is something that's been going on for quite some time, whether it was overt, like, let's just go ahead and bully everybody so they don't vote. Heck, we're kind of guilty for that. Look at the Jim Crow laws. The Americans are not unique, nor the Russians unique in trying to create doubt in the institution of self-determination. So it's throughout human history.
Now, the states and the cities, the towns and the counties that have to contend with this, in your estimation, are they outmatched, or do they have a chance at rising up to this challenge?
You know, having worked with people that work in the government, being a former guy that used to work in the government, especially, you know, a former military officer, you know, servant leaders are servant leaders, right? They're going to do the best they can with the tools they have. So when you think on a daily basis inside the DoD, when you look at, I mean, just talk to your friends that were in the military right after Vietnam with degraded equipment, or how about the Korean War? When you look at the Pusan Push with Task Force Smith, where those poor guys, the country downsized so much after World War II, they were sent into Korea and did the best they can with the tools they have. That's instilled in the rugged individualism of being American. Every government organization, whether they're former military, you know, we have proof of that in wars like the Korean War or after Vietnam. People will rise to the occasion. So I don't think it's a fact that the average rugged individual won't go out there and try and get this done. I think the issue is what resources they have available to them. And when you think about it, you're going into, like I said, you know, county in Pueblo, Colorado, or maybe in the middle of Kansas or Nebraska or New Jersey. It makes no difference. You're working with people that cyber, when you think about the industry, you've got people in IT that don't understand cyber. Now you're looking at people with degraded resources to understand the attack, and cyber is one of those things that's a lot. I see so many similarities in combat. People get hung up on their tactics and techniques and procedures and forget to worry about strategy and doctrine. And so what ends up happening is you've got all these small counties, you've got all these small municipalities that are doing the best they can with well-intentioned people. But at the end of the day, it's not that they're so much outmatched by a nation state. It's just that they got so many gaps in their network and so much gaps in their knowledge. It doesn't take much. You know, recently, I think there was a company, you may know the name of it, created quite a stir in which they went out and tested a bunch of counties already and came up with this huge report that basically it was Armageddon for voting. You know, I don't know if it was that bad, but I certainly can tell you if history repeats itself, and for some crazy reason it does, you're going to see that, you know, if you really went down and spent time on these municipalities and went out to them, you're going to see they have degraded capabilities. Anytime you have any degraded capabilities, heck, if it's happening to, you know, Fortune 10 companies, Fortune 100 companies, it's certainly going to happen at the municipality and state level. So I will tell you, it's not so much that you've got this mismatch between this Herculean rock star hacker that's the best in the world. They're just going against people that are doing the best they can with probably not enough resources or knowledge on what they're up against. Add a little bit of confusion on top of that, you're going to have problems.
And so what, in your estimation, is to be done? How should we come at this problem?
Yeah, I think, you know, I'm a student of history. So what I tell people there has to be first of all, there's a cultural change that needs to happen. Then there needs to be a organizational change that occurs. and then there needs to be a commitment. Culturally, we need to start realizing that even though it's not popular to say sometimes, our very democracy is at risk. I tell people 243 years ago, foreign powers came onto our shores and they wore our red coats and they came into our homes and they came to our businesses and they took what they want because there's really no standing army to protect them. 243 years later, foreign powers and people wearing not red coats but red hoodies are coming into our homes and our businesses, and they're taking what they want because there is no standing army to protect us. So we've got to kind of galvanize. We've got to become kind of the modern day Minutemen of today and really take this seriously. And so first of all, culturally, we have to change our mindset and understand that the home front is the front lines. Second of all, we have to start organizing this more effectively. I don't think we're leveraging what we put into our country and how we designed it with the power of what the National Guard can do. They can definitely help a lot more in the advisory role. You're going to get some level of consistency and chain of command, and they can assist it. I recognize DHS is involved, but DHS, while they may be in the state and local with, Border Patrol and things like that, I don't think there's enough of the organizational structure that really leads to state accountability or state ownership. Not accountability so much, more than ownership. So the states want to do the right things, but I don't think there's any kind of confederation in the same way we would do in the homeland defense of the first, second, and third domains of warfare, i.e. land, sea, or air. I don't think we're doing an effective enough job in organizing for the fifth domain of warfare, which is cyber. The next one is commitment. Once we come up with this organization, let's commit to it, because this is really, I tell people, they say, well, why did you get into cyber? I said, because, in my 40s, I can't jump out of airplanes anymore. And I'd like to continue into servant leadership and defense of the nation. And you and I know the numbers. You're in this industry. I read your bio. We're looking at a $6 trillion in cybercrime by the year 2021, 2022, around there, according to Steve Morgan at Cyber Ventures. And you think about that, well, gosh, our national debt's hovering, around $21 trillion right now? So 6 divided by 21, that's 28.5%. I don't know a household or a nation for that matter, which is the sum of households, that can afford to lose 30% of its income. And to prove that, we've already spent $2 trillion in cyber, and we're still in the situation we're at, where an 18-year-old kid from Moldova can essentially shut down a company, let alone our individual right to vote. So I think commitment has got to be, after you do the first two, has to sustain.
What do you think needs to happen in terms of the crossover of the various domains? In other words, is it fair game to hurt the nations who are coming after us in the cyber domain, to hurt them in other domains, to launch military attacks, to impose sanctions on them, and so on?
I think that's probably one of the most pointed questions I've ever heard, because you're right aligned with my thinking, which is, I always tell this people, when I talk about how I approach going after cyber and how our team goes after cyber, I always start with this premise. If you believe that cyber is an information technology problem, then I'm not the guy to talk to. However, if you believe that it truly is the fifth domain of warfare and it is a kind of warfare, then I'm the kind of guy you should talk to. So in that vein, if in fact nation states are engaging in the fifth domain of warfare and the casualties are real, there has to be a red line that you're not going to cross, or we have to figure out what the other modes of retaliation should be. Are they socioeconomic? Do we get to the point where you're putting people's lives at risk? Have we taken anything beyond just a few murmurs in the United Nations? There has to be a clear, we had the Monroe Doctrine, which was carry a big stick, right? You basically had a president that said, here's what's going to happen. Well, I think what needs to happen is Congress, the legislative branch, all need to come together and use the power of the State Department to sit there and say, look, here's our doctrine. Here's what we're to consider. Here are the things that just have to stop. And I agree that puts us also in the realm of, well, what's good for the geese is good for the gander, right? So if we're going to put that kind of doctrine out, we got to make sure we're living up to it as well. And I think what's happened within cyber is both sides have been able to play in the ambiguity of what's really happening. Once you draw that line, it's going to be tough to kind of, pull back and not, in other words, you just can't say it without living it yourself. So I think that's probably why it hasn't happened.
Yeah, it's peculiar to me. My observation certainly has been that leadership has been reticent to draw that line. It almost seems we're deliberately not going to say where the line is.
Yeah, no, I think your intuition is right. Because think of the implications. I mean, it was pretty much we drew the line when we put a blockade around Cuba, right? We pretty much said, hey, we're just not going to accept ICBMs 92 miles off of a homestead. We're just not going to accept it, right? Mm-hmm. Well, that was a very clear line of demarcation. The Monroe Doctrine said, hey, we just won't tolerate foreign powers in our southern hemisphere. We just won't, right? We don't want Maximilian taking over Mexico, right? Where do you draw the line cyber-wise? I have some ideas around it, but you got half the CEOs, or probably more than half the CEOs on the commercial side of industry don't understand security. Throw that cybersecurity, throw that back into government. Where are the demarcations? Just sometimes describing, when I'm trying to explain to someone how you can rank onto autonomous system numbers for threat, the eyes glaze over in the first syllable. So, and I wonder sometimes if there's almost a purposeful lack of understanding. But I 100% agree with you. We have to start defining what the engagement areas are and what we're willing to accept as threat activity, and get that agreed upon. Even if you just did it within your own allies. Well, let's say, let's get with the European Union. Let's define it. Let's get with the Organization of Southern States. And then, maybe the UN isn't the first place to start. Maybe it's regionally. But I think you at least have to start establishing some kind of regional doctrine so that people start to get it. And, today what happens is Sally gets hacked in Boise, Idaho, and they call the local police. The police sit there and just say they have no idea. So how do we create an escalation criteria? And oh, by the way, let's get into the whole fact of digital forensic investigation. Who's going to prove that it was one? Put yourself in context when you think of defense of the nation. What do you think right now? I think there's about 750,000 to 1 million people serving on active duty right now, and they're pretty much defending the whole world in land, sea, and air warfare. What is the size of the cyber force that you need to defend Main Street USA? So the economics behind it may also be prove to be futile as well. So, it's a complex problem, but I think you don't solve complex problems by just saying it's too complex. To your point, I think we got to start drawing some lines in the sand and start making some simple definitions of what right and wrong is, and then we build on those. But right now we haven't started.
It seems to me like it also opens us up for these situations where large organizations in the private sector, if something bad happens to them, a data breach happens, someone gets in and attacks them or takes a bunch of data, it's very easy for them to make an announcement and say, well, we were hit by a nation-state attack and there's nothing we could have done, and throw their hands up in the air. And it's sort of this
network segmentation. Their point of sale systems on their.
But if right, but suppose I'm imagining. Let's say I was a chemical company, and one of my storage tanks exploded. And if I got up in front of the press and I said, well, a nation state attacked my storage tank and there's nothing I could have done. It's just beyond our capability to defend ourselves. Well, the next question would have been, I'm sorry, what? Can you, do you have any evidence can you prove that? Because if that were so, I obviously, I don't have to tell you this, that there would be some sort of retaliation for that, or at least someone would look into it. So I don't know. I feel as though we've got this funny little feedback loop.
Within 36 hours, you'd have guys in black jumpsuits, landing in a country quietly at night with infrared goggles on. I mean,
exactly. So I just, it leaves me scratching my head as to, where this is going to go and when we're going to start allowing some of these things to crystallize and be gone with some of this ambiguity that we've got to, I don't know, it seems like we've got to take this to the next level and get serious with how we treat this. Let me give you a classic
example of ambiguity. When I got into this space, it was by accident. I remember the first time I was doing work inside the federal government on nation-state type stuff. And, we were doing big data analytics. We were doing counterterrorism. We were using large data sets to find threat activity in the Levant region and other regions. I said to him, well, how do you guys define how you're defending? Oh, we do a defense in depth. I'll say, great. So explain to me how this is a defense in depth. And they walked me through a defense in depth. This is my earliest years in cyber. And I went, that's not a defense in depth. If you're calling this cyber warfare, that's not even close to a defense in depth, right? So how are you defining your actions on the objective, which would be translated into cyber as the attack surface? And they described it to me, and I'm like, that's not an attack surface. So one of the things that has to happen in the fundamentals is we keep saying we're fighting the fifth domain of war, but we're not fighting cyber like a real war. The fundamental principles of warfare, just think of it from a pure humanitarian perspective. Ever heard of where the U.S. military might basically be defending, non-combatants? And when you look at your network, you got some non-combatants in your network. What do you do to safeguard the non-combatants? You do everything you can to get them out of the combatant zone, right? And you segment them and you protect them and you make sure they're safe. Just that mindset around endpoints doesn't exist. And then when you look at, okay, well, now that I've got that last line of defense protected care of, how do I canalize bad guys to go where I'm really strong or canalize them away from where I'm really weak? People don't do that with network segmentation. Then you say, well, when it hits my front lines, how do I attrit them? Well, when you look at how we define the perimeter and attrit threat, not really doing too well. And then when you look at getting into the enemy's decision cycle, if it's outside the firewall, that's something we would never do in a true defense in depth. We're deep into the enemy terrain, figuring out what's going on. And these are all concepts with the advent of big data and everything else that you can define this. So I think the first thing we have to do is really start saying one or the other. If this is an IT problem, let's continue to treat it like an IT problem and continue to spend the money we're spending. Or two, if we're going to consider it warfare, let's start turning companies, into Minutemen and understand the fundamentals of a defense in depth and understand the fundamentals of how to define an attack surface. And so there's a lot of work that's got to happen on both sides. And I think once we get the fundamentals down, we can start asking the bigger questions. Okay, now that we've truly defined the perimeter, now that we've truly defined the business ecosystem and our network segments and our endpoints, and these events that have happened, clearly these events are not the act of a nation state hacker. This was clearly an opportunistic. We left this back door wide open. So this was not nation state. Well, no, this one, they rootkitted us. They did some really clever social engineering. They came in, made this deposit after we rootkitted us, and then went ahead and did an MDNS attack internal because they were able to gain access to this, accelerate their user privileges on this one box. That's when we can start defining whether something is nation state. I 100% agree with you. When you look at all these, my favorites are the ones where the C goes, we were hit by a very sophisticated attack. And then you go in there and you're like, no. Your firewall had port 444 wide open and I could get to your configuration panel just by hitting the IP address from outside. Not very sophisticated. Right. And the reason why we start saying things are sophisticated, as you know, is because there's been a hesitancy of senior leadership in organizations to take the time and educate themselves on the technology. And that's just at a point where if you're going to be a chief executive officer today, be the chief. Spend some time to understand how your network operates and understand the fundamentals of it so that when your IT guys come in the room, don't focus on the fact that they're wearing Millennium Falcon t-shirts. Be able to speak their language. Spend time to understand. Everything about I guarantee everything about Salesforce, inside and out. You need to start understanding a little bit about your network. So I think that whole domain of let's come up with a common ontology and taxonomy. Let's really define so that attack surface means attack surface for Walmart means the same thing for a guy that's selling shoes in Nebraska. We need to do a better job in that. And I think the US NIST framework is a great start, but I think we need to really start comparing apples to apples and orange to oranges. And then once we do that, we can define, this really was nation state. And by the way, this really was an attack. Because let's go back to your chemical plant. If someone cut the wires, took the video feed, was able to take the video feed and create a bogus feed so that it was creating a bogus transmission, they were able to go ahead and do a local jamming of the networks. They were able to use refractive technologies and hyperlight activities to basically degrade the capabilities of your sensors. They did all these capabilities. They realized that the only way in was to basically rent a Cessna, or a King Air and do an airdrop and use, 7-cell parachutes to jump in and take down the objective, clearly that's nation state. But the analogy is if a guy just got a little drunk downtown, decided he wanted to blow it up, the door was open, the padlock was unlocked, he opened up the gate, there was no guard dogs, and basically he was able to walk up straight to it and basically take a stick of dynamite that he had left over from the last time he went out in the woods, or tannerite, and blow it up, well, that's not nation state. So I think we have to start really coming up with common ontologies, common taxonomies, establishing standards, and start taking accountability on what's on our network so we can make these comments. Because you're right. And the other part is, not only do people just say it was sophisticated or even nation state, the other part is sometimes they don't even report it.
That's Sean O'Brien from At Risk Technologies. Our thanks to McAfee for sponsoring our program. Visit McAfee.com/insights and find out why McAfee is the device-to-cloud cybersecurity company. For everyone here at the CyberWire, I'm Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening.